I'll introduce Nilofer Qazi to you. Nilofer Qazi is a social policy expert. She's worked with UN and she worked a lot with UN Habitat during the earthquake in 2005. Then she was also involved in relief work in 2010. Nino is also a filmmaker. She is a writer. And obviously she takes a very keen interest in the art of gastronomy. Her book, Culinary Tales from Balochistan, was recently published and has been getting quite rave reviews. It's a book with pictures in it, and it's a travelogue basically about Balochistan and how she traveled through the whole province and looked at the food and the culinary traditions over there. So Nino, I'll ask you short, crisp questions, and I would like some interesting answers so that we can actually cover a lot of your travels in Balochistan and your experiences. So my first question before I begin is that you're wearing really interesting shoes, which are very colorful. Where did you get these?
On Instagram.
Okay.
Truck art.
That was
something that everyone knows that associates Pakistan with. So something nice.
That's a very crisp and short and sweet answer. Anyway, so Nino, without any further ado, I'll refer to her as Nino because she's a friend, and Nilofer Qazi is a mouthful. So Nino, you've traveled around the world. You've lived in different continents of the world. You have a very diverse palate, obviously, and you've seen different cuisines and everything. And you came back to Pakistan. What prompted you to sort of take such keen interest in the cuisine of Pakistan, and especially the obscure culinary tradition that is rampant around the country? What was that? What prompted you?
What you call obscure, thank you, Wajahat. Thank you for making the time. And Wajahat himself is a keen adventure traveler, and so he's taken out the time for this. So thank you so much for doing this. What you call obscure, I'm calling invisible. I mean, the majority of food in this country is not obscure. That is home cooking. That is what is most familiar and what is most intimate to the majority of those who consume it. We call it obscure because it is not available widely in the 5 cities which somehow constitutes the sum total of what is Pakistani. And so that is not the truth. And my realization of this happened when I was, during the 2010 floods, I was traveling for work in interior Sindh and parts of Balochistan that I had not been to. And I was really looking forward to amazing Sindhi food and what was Balochi food that I am not familiar with. And what ended up was I was again introduced to the same GT road food that we call, like the dal mash and the chicken kadai and, maybe roti, or if you're lucky, some form of palau. So I realized immediately that I'm being served food which is not local. So instinctively again, I realized, so where is the local food? Because I know it's there, but it's not in the public spaces. So that sort of gauged and triggered all sorts of questions that we usually delve in other disciplines in politics. What is invisible and what the lack of diversity in the public space, the lack of freedoms in the public space. But when it also started reflecting in our food, I was like, whoa, here we have a problem. Because everywhere else in the world, their local cuisine, the very localized of that national cuisine is available in the public space, but not here. So I began to think, wait a minute, if someone doesn't start documenting it, the oral tradition which exists will disappear, because that is just a fact of life. if you do not document that which is invisible or it remains in the oral tradition, it will die out. And so Pakistan on a Plate, this is the first book of that series, is an endeavor to document the undocumented, make visible the invisible.
Okay, you mentioned Pakistan on Plate. So you produced this show, like a series of short documentaries for YouTube, in which you travel around the country and you document, like you
That's
said,
right.
invisible food. Wasn't it enough for you to satiate your, desire to document food? Why did you have to write a book? Because you know how in Pakistan, reading, the tradition of reading is not that big. People don't read books. So why did you write a book, and why did you write the first book just about Balochistan?
I think you've answered the question in your question. Pakistan's tradition not to read is linked to our social indicators and the lack of education, the lack of literacy. We remain an primarily oral-based culture. But as I said, to preserve what is Pakistani, it had to be documented. So the visual manifestation, which was the Pakistan on a Plate, has one certain dimension where those of us who are ADD and 5 minutes and you see a story or you connect to it, that's one way of communicating it. But when you want to go in depth and exploring the history and the cultural linkages, or exploring it wider, and fully, experiencing what is food and what does it represent, it had to be in a form of a book. And then also, as I said, for me, it is about the documentation of it. So yes, it is a cookbook, it is a travel log, but it's also for those who are interested in history, in culture. So it is academic in some ways, but done in a story style.
Okay, you are from Balochistan. Originally you are from Pishin.
Yes.
And we all know that Balochistan has its problems. The terrain. It's one of the largest provinces in the country with its it has a very diverse mountains and deserts and all that. And then, given the political situation in the province, was it hard to travel around Balochistan? I mean, how was it?
For me, it was not hard as in terms of accessibility. I am privileged in many ways. So privilege all over the world, including in this country, opens doors for you. But also, I also wanted to. So it is not as difficult as people make it out to be. I had no guards. I mean, I didn't live in hotels. They don't exist in these areas. And so I was keen. So I made it happen. So I have a home in Pishin. So of course that was my own home. But I don't have a home in Kalat. I don't have a home in Gwadar. I don't have a home in Killa Saifullah, etc. So where there's a will, there's a way. So it wasn't difficult, but it would also not be accurate to say it is easy for outsiders to travel the terrain of Balochistan. So where there's a will, there's a way.
Yes, that is true. And it's a well-written book with great photographs in it. And I see that you're mingling with the Sardars and the privileged class, as you put it. So there were two aspects. I mean, you basically hung out with that strata of society where they opened their houses, because Baloch are very hospitable people. So you must have tasted the food in their houses. And then you also got in touch with the chefs, the cookers, the people who actually cook these invisible dishes.
Correct.
How did you connect with that lot?
To begin with, the Khan of Kalat is probably the only chapter in which we would say upper middle class or a royal kitchen. The rest of the remaining 14 chapters and the 34 recipes, there are 36 or 35 recipes, are ordinary, extraordinary, everyday recipes. And so the preservers of food culture are women. The public space, people who make food are men. And that has a lot to do with parda, the ability to be in public spaces. So the invisible food is protected, or they don't even realize it's protected, but it's women who are actually the preservers of that food. And to some extent, the reason why you don't see them in the public spaces is because they aren't in the public spaces. They aren't in restaurants, they're not chefs in dhabas. Men are. So that's like one of the reasons. Accessing, of course, I had translators everywhere I went. Although I'm Pashtun, my Pashto is not that fluent, and I certainly can't have that free-flowing conversation with them. I'm not Baloch, and I don't speak Balochi. I don't speak Brahvi, which are the three major languages. There are many others. So I always had interlocutors. And to access households, which is where all the recipes come from, I used personal contacts. I used organizations like BRSP, Balochistan Rural Support Program. I used NRSP and 2 degrees of separation personal contacts. Okay. So sure. A whole, menu of networks.
Okay, Balochistan is a big province. It has very diverse topography. You have the Makran coast, which is like 600-700 kilometers.
975, I think.
Okay, long coast.
Very.
Yeah, and you have the north, which is like mountains, and then you have south. So there's a lot of diversity in terms of food in the province.
Absolutely.
So can you please tell us, let's focus on the north first. So tell us about the dishes of the north, what kind of dishes and what kind of ingredients. Can you please shed light on that?
Sure. The first chapter, which is Pishin, I make landi. Landi is preserved goat's meat or lamb. Traditionally, it's lamb, which is like jerky, for those of you who are familiar with it, where it's described in full detail, but in short, it's basically cleaned lamb, it's seared, and then it is hung for about 6 to 8 weeks. And the only condiment is salt traditionally and hing, asafoetida. So these are the 2 original, because that's a preservative, asafoetida, and salt, which was available around. Now, of course, a modern version is made where, because there's so many spices available, so some people use cinnamon, dalchini, or cumin, or even red chili, because the influence of the north and the Punjab has created a sort of a wider maybe palette. But in general, food in the north, south, and in the coastal is very minimal condiments, and the primary focus is preservation, not spices. So landi is a very big thing, and it's, in fact, we are in the season of landi. And I'm still I make landi every year. So friends say, so when is our landi coming? I was like, don't worry, next month I'm going, and you'll get your landi in January, So that's become a tradition, and I revitalized that tradition after a generation in my own home. Balochistan is also very well known for its variety of breads, dode, and of course we have naan, and we have chapatis and roghni, like many of you are familiar with that, but I think have maybe about 9 or 11 recipes of a whole variety of breads, from spongy to pancake to thick to thin, fermented milk with water, baked. In fact, the most interesting, I would say, recipe is kak, which I believe to be the original first bread humankind made. And I link that to Mehergarh, 9,000 years old, where when a nomadic society settled down, what is now in Bolan district, Mehergarh, which predates the Indus civilization by 2,000 years. And once a nomadic society decided to settle down and begin the first agricultural, settlement, they had to eat, but they hadn't invented utensils yet. So what did they use? Stones around them. Fire had already been discovered, so they crushed wheat, I'm assuming with a little bit of water. I don't know if they put salt in those days or not. And then they wrapped it around a stone, heated, and above ground and below ground, they would bake it. And so to this day, they have kak in Balochistan. So we have had a continuous tradition of bread for 9,000 years in Balochistan. Neolithic man.
So,
yeah, and the coast.
No. Before we come to the coast, most of us in the northern central Pakistan, we know the most common dish is Saji, right?
Yes.
Everybody knows Saji because, people don't know much about Balochistan food.
Yes.
Saji is the first thing that comes to my mind. Tell us how like popular Saji is. I mean, because it's like more of a common food.
Yes. Oh, yes, of course. Again, a misnomer, and this applies to all of Pakistan. There is an assumption that, Pashtuns eat meat, right? And the rest of Pakistan eats vegetables. Actually, all of Pakistan primarily eat vegetables. And meat is linked with socio-economic capacity. So this is a misnomer. But because those societies which have animal husbandry and they have a nomadic tradition and they are tribal, so when a goat or a lamb reaches towards the end of their life, then, as a community, they bake it, cook it, stuff it, underground or above ground. So the above ground is Saji, which is where with, again, a salt bath, not patting of salt. Basically, water and salt, you basically give it a salt bath. So in some ways, I suppose you're also cleansing it, and in as much as you can imagine a nomadic society would. And then on stakes, in a circle of fire, it is roasted. And the technique of the chef or the community is how they play with the fire with the staked meat. And that's Saji. Now, in Pakistan, Saji is also now had chicken, which is blasphemy. Because, in Balochistan, hello, there is no chicken Saji. So,
that's exactly what I had in mind, because when we go around Pakistan, it's always chicken.
Well, that's not, it's not traditional, that's modern. So
let's come to the vegetable part of, the cuisine that you have in Balochistan, especially in the north. Because right now we're focusing on the northern part of Balochistan.
Okay. Well, it's really dode, which is like a bread, and then lots of
Saag.
That too, yes, a whole variety of spinach. Spinach, as some of you know, may or may not know, its origins is Afghanistan. And in the book, I have stated that Balochistan is a snapshot of ancient Central Asia. It is much more closer to Central Asia, both in culture, language, cuisine. Central Asia, Turkey and Iran have moved forward in modern life. We are the ancient imprint of it. We are much closer in terms of pretty much anything than to the northern part of Pakistan. And this is also reflected in our food traditions as well, from tea to food. We eat a lot more salads. Bizarrely enough, you would imagine, in a sort of a arid, dry, drought kind of environment, where would you find salad, right? You would think that. But don't forget, overpopulation, modernization, and extraction has been the recent experience of Balochistan. And it has reflected in our food as well. But that is not the traditional pattern. There were lots of salads, and there continue to be lots of salads. Things like superfoods, almost all the greens, kale, for example, which is considered a very privileged salad in this part of Pakistan, is very common over there. So is basil and many greens, a lot jumbo, which is the most common one over there, and dairy-based Kurut is one, but yogurt. So these two make the very basis of everyday food, and as you said, saag as well.
Kurut, you mentioned. Kurut is now it's like a
it's dried
cheese.
milk.
It's dried,
yes,
cheese,
dried milk.
Yeah, but I found that Kurut is also in Afghanistan, in the northern part of Pakistan.
Yes, same area.
Yeah. But can you please tell the audience a bit about Kurut and the tradition and how it is made? Because a lot of people don't know about Kurut.
Yeah. Kurut is like a dehydrated milk. In Balochistan, it's rock hard. You boil the milk, strain it, and then dehydrate it in a how do you call it? Not in the sun, in shade. And then you create little balls, and it becomes then your milk product or an ingredient which you can use throughout the year. So how we then use it is we rehydrate it and make it into a paste, and then with water, depending on what kind of consistency you want, we put it in dumplings or homemade noodles, which are made from wheat. We use a lot of noodles, homemade noodles, and that tradition continues in northern Balochistan.
Well, in the northern part of Pakistan, they use Kurut, and they also use homemade noodles to make dao.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's go towards the coastal part of Balochistan, which is obviously on the coast. So there's fish. So there's a lot of Mai dishes that I saw in the book.
Yes. You also have dates in that area as well. So this is not the entire province is not a sugar cane, because of, again, for obvious reasons, no water, So we used date paste. That is our sweetener. So that goes in cheese, that goes in making halwas. There's a lovely fermented wheat, sprouted wheat, which releases its own sugars, and then that's cooked into a gelatin-like halwa. Traditionally, of course, in modern times they use sugar, but of course in the old days they would have used date paste for that. Dehydrated fish of every imaginable kind, and then Kurut, but softer cottage cheese Kurut with date paste and roti.
So did you see any food which overlaps between the coastal part and the northern part and the central part of Balochistan, which is like pretty common everywhere? Like which
Kurut, I would say. We don't eat fish really in sort of the northern the northern
Obviously,
part,
yeah.
and let's not forget that the coastal area is directly we border with Iran, so there is like an enormous amount of interaction with Iran. And then socio-economically and historically, we also are linked to Oman. You know, and so there's a lot of women-headed households in the coastal areas. They run the shops, they run their home, because their men are either fishing in the sea for months and or employed in the Gulf. So the whole dynamic of coastal Balochistan is very different. Lack of a better word, it's freer, it's less tribal. You know, and of course it's always hot. So, you know, there's no cold, like it's never cold. So your, you know, your agricultural patterns are very different. In fact, I would say there is no agriculture in Gwadar, because 20 years they will have no water. Basically, it's rain-fed. So if there is rain, you know, whatever little patch that they have, and they can do sort of sustainable, some kind of vegetable patch, but there is no, they cannot rely on any kind of agriculture to feed them. So it's either dehydrated food, or from the ocean, or from Karachi, because it's directly linked. At the other end, with Las Bela, it's linked to Sindh.
So I saw these little interesting berries. You know, I saw a picture, and I think
Schneid.
Schneid, yeah. Tell us about Schneid and what.
You know Schneid?
A lot of
Yes,
Baloch
yes,
in there.
yeah.
So can you please raise your hand if you? Okay.
Yes,
Oh,
okay. So, you know, so in fact, there's an exhibition at 8B2 Gallery, and I asked a chef friend, those of you who are from Islamabad as well, Burning Brownie, Brew, and Sugar Rush. Amar took Schneid and he converted it into ice cream. Yes. So Schneid traditionally, it's had as a snack, you know, as which is wild pistachio, but of a variety that is it does not look like a pistachio. You know, it's more like a berry. It has a soft skin, and it has a bean, you know, like a kernel inside. And the Pashinwalas will tell you that there's a style of having it, you know, a style of having it. And anyone in Balochistan will know it. And this is very uniquely from Balochistan. Maybe in the former Fatah areas, maybe there would be some areas, but KP Walas will not know Schneid, you know. So this is very quintessentially from Balochistan, and primarily in the north.
So let's talk about foods and Schneids and berries which are used in different recipes, which are very exclusive to Balochistan.
Schneid is one of them.
Okay, Schneids. So tell us about like some really exotic recipes, like, you know, very exclusive to Balochistan, like even like maybe I won't even know about it.
Well, I mean, Schneid oil, Schneid soup, which is very tedious to make because it's very, you know, to remove the skin, the soft flesh of the Schneid from its kernel is a very long process. It's in the Kalat episode on YouTube. The oil is used also, you know, as a cooking oil, you know, at low heat. That is very, very unique. And in fact, the Khan of Kalat, when I had requested the demonstration should be this, he was like, he was so excited because he said, I haven't had it in 20 years because it's gone out of fashion, you know. So even within Balochistan, some of the traditional cuisine, because they are painstakingly long to make. And in today's world, hello, you want to cook and get on with life, you know. And a lot of women, I mean, you know, they not only cook for the family, but they have to take care of the goats and the sheep and cleaning and cooking. So, you know, if there is an opportunity to cut the time to cook, they will adopt, you know, modern shortcuts, you know. So
Nino, you just used the word out of fashion food,
Yes.
yeah? So that out of fashion food, which the tradition is dying, and you documented it, do you think that the people who cooked that food, men or women, were they excited about your project? Were they happy? And do you think that that obscure or invisible food, can it be revived back into and instilled back into the society of Balochistan?
I'll tell you, thank you for asking that question, Wajahat. In my travels of 100 districts of this country, the one thing that my heart broke is that there is no self-realization of how important what they preserve is. So almost every community, without fail, they would think that I've come here and I'm talking to them about food and, how do they cook it, and, that was an icebreaker towards actually another important matter that I had come to speak to them about, but I wasn't revealing it. Because some people actually ask me, wait a minute, you mean you're actually interested in the food? And I'm like, yeah, what did you think? And there would be like laughter and like, why? And then the conversation would be in reverse. Do you know why it's important? Do you know what your food and your ingredients tell us about our people, our histories, what it's associated with? Do you realize that you are preserving something which other Pakistanis are unaware of? And the realization of that, when I would be speaking to them, I cannot describe how beautiful that was when they realized how much value I put on what they took for granted, like whatever, And that also was very heartbreaking as well, as I said. But then once they realized, oh my God, food, and she's interested in it, then it became like competitive, like, wait a minute, actually, my aunt actually makes it much better than her. Like, let me just call her. Or do you know that? So then they would become very competitive in the village. And the conversation took a different kind of depth and, nuance. But it was we are unaware of how important and how valuable it is, or how much respect we must give to women who spend hours on just what we call just nutrition, because they think of food as merely sustenance. The element of art, the element of cultural preservation, the element of history, it's completely, they're unaware of it, which is the purpose of part of my work.
What is your favorite dish in the whole of Balochistan?
I associate food not just, through taste, but through memories, And landi, as I said, I began to start making landi, and I have been doing it now for several years because it's something that I feel it connects me, from great-grandfather, great-grandmother, to my grandmother, to my parents' generation, and to me, and inshallah, Musa, my nephew. So the continuation of tradition, it gives me that link to a land which I love, and I haven't lived in because of the nature of my parents and also one's own life. But it continues to link me to the land. So I would say landi.
Landi, yeah. I haven't tasted landi yet because you've been promising me.
I will share. I have.
I never got landi yet. Yeah. A lot of other people.
Your cousin does. He gets it
I'm not every year. Cousin, so. Let's come to the book. Was it like, I remember when you were doing Pakistan Unplayed and we discussed the book. Remember that?
Yeah.
And you committed yourself to writing, which is very hard, and it needs a lot of discipline.
Yeah.
How was the process? I mean, when you traveled, did you take notes? I mean, obviously you gathered a lot of recipes, but when you actually sat down to write the book, did you know was it going to be a travelogue, only a recipe, cookbook? Wasn't it hard to thread the whole thing?
Yes, very hard. very hard. Writing does not come naturally to me at all, but if I am arguing that documentation is very important, I also had to demonstrate, that. So, it's very easy to lecture people, right? You have to actually kind of also do walk the talk as well. So for me, this was a very difficult process because writing does not come naturally to me. Like I have other skills, which are perhaps stronger, but not writing. But anyway, it was done. Lockdown was a huge facilitator because, couldn't go anywhere. So that sort of imposed a certain kind of discipline. But the nature of where do you begin? Where I began, it was very clear. It was going to be Pishin because that's my hometown. I start with who am I, my family, etc. So that's the fulcrum. And unlike, I suppose it's a double entendre as well on this one, that most people associate Balochistan Quetta. So, like 30 miles from Quetta, 100 miles from Quetta. The book is how far it is from Pishin, because that's my fulcrum, So I already begin to force you to shift, your gaze and lensing, from Pishin and start from an area which isn't your natural, if you even have an idea of Balochistan. Then it was the recipes, of course, I had already documented through Pakistan on a plate. But when you write a book, there's a life of it that emerges organically. So for example, I have no videos on Khair Bakhsh Murray, but I cannot write a book on Balochistan without KB Murray, who is one of the Sardars of Balochistan, the head of the Murray tribe, who also happens to be my uncle. He's passed away. So I have a chapter on him and his favorite food. So I give you an insight into a very well-known man, but from a private lens. So that itself is unique, Then the 1935 earthquake, which decimated Balochistan. And how do I write a book on Balochistan and make no reference to that? Because to this day, we are living that impact, And so I have recipes from a survivor who also happens to be an aunt and a female chef. But she was under the rubble of the 1935 earthquake for 4 days. Both lost her parents, lost, many family members, and then, grew up, etc. And so I have a chapter on Shireen Bibi as well. So, as I said, the book takes on, I have a chapter on the people from Balochistan who've left the province. And so the chapter is called Settlers, because that's a pun on, intended pun, because we talk about settlers in Balochistan, right? Like we have a community, whether it's the Hazaras or the Punjabis or anyone, people coming into Balochistan. But now we have become settlers outside of the province for reasons all of you know. So I have a chapter of the settlers of Balochistan and what food have they carried, in their new settlement. And in this case, it's khada kebab, and then I describe that in that process and what does that represent, from the sheep and animal husbandry, etc. Of course, many of you know the Quetta tea house, so I make reference to that. Why is it nationwide? Because they've settled outside of Balochistan, So there are many aspects of if you read between the lines, I've never been a subtle person, asked Maggie. So, I mean, I attempt to be subtle, but the book is not subtle,
Yeah. So, Balochistan is also ethnically quite
diverse, absolutely.
You have your Balochi, and you have Bravis, and you have Pashtun, and you have Hazara. So, do you think the food is, some of the food dishes exclusive to all these different communities, or is it like pretty much common within all the people?
The Hazara community, I have chosen ash as their representation. I make my own ash. Every family in northern Balochistan has their own ash recipe. So ash has many symbols which represent the Hazara community. And so, but many Pashtuns do not know, it's not common to them either, and I explain that as well. So the Baloch don't necessarily eat ash, unless, we eat everything, but you know what I mean, like it's not considered, part of their culinary staple as such. Coastal will definitely not be having ash. So I explain that as well. I have an association with ash. But Afghanistan, Central Asia, Iran, they have ash, but in very different forms. But the noodles, kurut, or some kind of yogurt, some kind of bean is the base, and then add meat if you are able to, or soupy meat, or is it drier? Is it more soupy? That varies.
Okay, now let's come to your travels once again. I mean, it was quite an interesting journey, I'm sure, because it was there was some adventure involved. I'm sure you have a lot of interesting stories. So tell us some interesting, funny, exciting thing that happened during your journey throughout the province.
It's in the book, so I can repeat it. As I said, we had no guards, and I had no interest in, sort of moving how they usually do. So I was going to Mehergarh, very excited. Oh my God, I was so excited about Mehergarh, I cannot describe it. So BRSP was very kind enough. They were providing the logistical support to get to Bolan. So I arrive at the office at 6 in the morning, and I see 6 guards over there. And I travel alone, so I was like, what are they doing here? Usually it was Anwar Saab, the driver. He and I become best friends because there's all these conversations that you have, on the road. And so I said, hello, what are these guards doing here? No, Bibi, let them come with us. I said, but why? So I called up 6 in the morning. I wake up the CEO. He's used to this. So, and I said, Nadir Gul Saab, why are there guards with me? Nino, just take the guards. So I was like, why are the guards? So he said, no, this is an area where there's a lot of conflict. And so I said, I'm going to record food. What conflict? So they don't know you're recording food, so they may think that you are
tourist.
Yeah, or I have no idea. So I said, okay, fine. So I chatted with the guards, and they said, we are Rind, which is a tribe, So we drive all the way, and we have lots of discussions on folk tales, which is very insightful, from their point of view, etc. We arrive just outside of Bolan, and we stop, and another 6 guards come. And I'm like, 1 female, 6 Rind guards. What are these? Who are these 6? Raisani guards. So I was like, I was like, where am I going, And they said, no, but you see, they know they're Rind. So they'll think you're Rind. So we need Raisani guards. So they see the Raisani guards and the Rind guards. So they'll know you're neutral. I said, okay. So when I went to Mehergarh, I don't think you can see it in the video, but I have 12 guards all around the parameter. Resani Rind, Resani Rind, Resani Rind, Resani Rind. I mean, it was hilarious, you know. So I even describe it in the book that, you know, I felt as if, you know, like it was the first time and the only time I felt in Balochistan that I was going, you know, like a VIP. But you know, it was hilarious actually at the time. But it was the only reminder that there's trouble where you think there's no trouble. You know, like there are issues that you have to deal with, or you have to factor in. Even whatever you're doing has absolutely nothing to do with, you know, politics or, you know, or anything to do with power, you know.
Okay, now would you want to talk about something?
Actually, I would like to hear from them.
I've run out of questions, and I'm sure some of you might have. So please go ahead.
Okay, I'm not a foodie, and in fact, I have severe eating disorder, so I'm always fascinated by people's obsession with food. But my question is that, and as Wajahat said, that Pakistanis and Balochis and people of Balochistan are very hospitable. So did they at any time force you to eat something that you did not like as a foodie? And secondly, as a lawyer, I'm asking a question, and as an optimist, because I know that there is very little chance, but like you have in France, they've registered under the GI laws champagne and other products, and even if you use the same grapes anywhere else, I'm going to talk about that later, but they've registered under GI laws. Is that something that the people of Balochistan or the government of Balochistan should consider for their special fruits and for their food? And my third question is related to the politics. How often do people take each other's food to their homes, like Baloch and Pashtun and Makrani people? Like, how often eating at someone else's place is one thing, but do they also adopt them later? Like, is there intermingling amongst them?
The food is actually, you know, it's all one, you know, so as I describe it as well, it is based on, Balochistan owns Balochistan. Balochistanis own all of their, they don't distinguish, you know, like, so, for example, the Maris claim they have the best Saji, you know, but so do the Killa Saifullah people. So that's Pashtun up in the sort of highland, and then you have, you know, like mountainous central, you know, heart of Balochi, you know, area. So they both claim, you know, they make Saji, you know, theirs is the best, you know. So they are culinarily we are one. Of course, the coastal is separate because they are separate in physically separate, you know, topography separate and very physically apart. And as I said, they are much closer to Iran and Oman. That's a physical element, and we as a state have not created that interconnectivity, but that's a developmental matter. GI, you know, Balochistan, if you first we recognize that they are the fruit basket of Pakistan, which we are. I mean, you know, 80% of all fruit and dried fruit comes from Balochistan. I don't know if we ever acknowledge them. We hardly ever acknowledge anything about Balochistan. So I think that would be kind of step one, you know, making it, you know, sort of a legal and, you know, benefiting it would be step 5 maybe, you know. First, let's acknowledge they exist, you know, and, you know, like celebrate it and appreciate it internally in Pakistan. The third, I'm not sure what, I forget.
Something you didn't want to eat, but then...
Oh, yes. I hate milk. So I only drink green tea, and I was in the right province, so I was very lucky that way. I love Kurut, I love yogurt. So actually, not bizarrely, but my constitution suits the local food. So I love fish. So I mean, no, I loved everything. I don't like spices. So it suited me.
Hi, I'm Marjabin Baloch. So excited to have a look at your book. So I just wanted to know that how did you make any distinctions between the Pashtun culinary, things and the Baloch things? Because I come not exactly from the two, but my mother was half Pashtun from Afghanistan, and then half Punjabi, and then my father was a Baloch. So I just wanted to know how passionate people are with their food in terms of,
In Balochistan, they don't make the distinction. We I'll give you another example, where you realize your own imposed sort of ideas. Balochistan, for everyone, and it is a tribal society, and in many parts feudal. So you assume correctly in the northern areas, and to some extent all the way down to the Sibbi, meaning this side of Balochistan, where who you are tribally, has some relevance. I would start asking the same questions in the Makran coast, and when I saw the hesitation, I was wondering, have I overstepped? Like, why is it that they not uncomfortable, almost uncomfortable talking about which tribe they come from? And I realized those identities are very weak.
Why so?
No, the nature, they're much more syncretic. They have intermingled much easier. It's the tribal associations, the tribal laws, the tribal system is very, very weak. So it is not a primary identity marker as we assume in northern central Balochistan. And so I was imposing, so which tribe are you from, as if it was a very important point, but it doesn't really apply as such over there. So it varies.
That distinction didn't even was eminent in the food that they ate?
No, I mean, again, the vast majority of the historical link, I would say, to again the north-south, not coastal areas, are Central Asian. So it's Afghanistan and Iran, to some extent Turkey, which influences all the way down, and so that's the root, so from saffron to preserving food, pulao, pilaf, all the various versions of rice cooked in broth, which is the essentiality of a pulao. Now, how enriched it is, how many spices you put in, but there are nuts in it. Again, it depends on where you are at, So, as I said, we are a snapshot, an ancient Central Asian culinary culture. The Pashtun, Baloch, no.
मैम क्वेश्चन जब पश्तो के कहूँ और तब वैद्य तो एक्सप्लेन किया ये शायद मुझ अंडार वर्तवायु अंडार अगलां दिस रिलेटेड देगा इंटेस्टाइन देन यू स्टफ इट विद मीट एंड ऑल
okay.
अगर कहता एक्सप्लेन के ऑडियंस था
because we remove all the organs from inside of the lamb, they then, of course, like those of you, well, we have an Irish lady here, but if you were Scottish, maybe, you make haggis. So we have a version of haggis, naturally, because nothing is wasted, right? So you have the brain and the kidneys, and we even preserve the fat. A layer of fat is removed from the landi. So he was saying, please tell the audience about the intestine, and that's also cooked. And I didn't record it in the book, but what about that? He made reference to that particular dish.
Hi, ma'am. It was good session, and I don't know about such a thing that you have mentioned in your book and about our culture. I'm basically from Pashtun, and it was good session. And I'm asking one thing that you have mentioned in your book about food. Didn't you mention the historical places in Pashtun?
Yes.
Or some other areas?
Yes.
Did you mention?
So, for example, Taj Lala. If you're from Pashtun, exactly. So, Taj Lala is an invisible hero of football. Now, Balochistan is not cricket country. We are football country. And Taj Lala was one of the most well-known footballers of the 60s. And there's a stadium named after him in Pashtun, but the rest of the country has no clue about him. We also have a Khan of Kalat who's buried in Pashtun. Now, Khan of Kalat is like the king of Balochistan. I mean, for those of you pre-British. And so the story, how is one of, the lead Baloch king buried in Pashtun in the heart of Pashtun land? So there's a story associated with that. So these are sort of historical sites and stories in Pashtun. And so, yes, so he was asking, did you also touch upon the area history? Absolutely, for
because,
sure.
Because this is not a cookbook, it is a travelogue.
Yes.
Where actually, according to she's connecting with the heritage, with people, culture through food. So it wasn't just a book about the recipes and all. It's also a travelogue. So I'm sure she mentions all the historical places as well.
Thank you very much for the talk this evening. It's been very, very interesting. I'm interested in several things. One, the meals of the dishes that you have in your book. Yeah, how much are they really associated with special cultural events? And are they day-to-day food, or is it something that's, maybe a Sunday dinner or something?
No, day-to-day.
Day-to-day. And the other, you did touch on it, but why does it not translate to food available in the public places? Is it because they're all so complex to make, or so expensive to make, or time-consuming that they're just not available on?
It's a combination of both. Mm-hmm. As I also mentioned, these, unlike Landi is made by men. Because it's large and, you need a lot of, you need multiple people, and it has to be roasted, and it's the whole lamb. So it's usually the purview of male. I'm literally the only female who made Landi, Of course I had help, but, but women tend to make a lot of these invisible recipes, and they don't come out. They cannot run public eateries. I mean, we don't have many hotels anyway, but the dhabas, those little khokas that you have all over, but they're in the public space. Now, this is Parda country. So you're not going to have women running dhabas. And then also, which was a very interesting response when I asked people that, like everywhere, all over the country, they said, why should we eat home food outside and pay for it? So, it was fascinating. It makes sense. So they can't afford meat every day, so they want meat in the hotels if they have disposable income. So what's happened is that you have this generic Mughlai Kashmiri food representing affluence, because they are products of court and courtly food. And so that has now become a monopoly in public spaces. And so in that process, what is most intimate and unrecognized will die out. Some of them is time consuming. Landi takes, it takes several hours just to prep. and then it takes 6-7 weeks to actually, for it to actually cure. And then, of course, you make a landi pulao, you can make landi bhujia, and there are many things. Homemade noodles. Not everyone wants to make them, but they do make them because it's cheaper. So you see, your socioeconomic indicator also guides you what will you do with nutrition, because food is nutrition for them. I do associate 2-3 recipes around traditions, like a married woman, like a young couple, and the young girl when she gets married, what does she do? Tukuni, I do it in Killa Saifullah chapter, where she has to bake a specific kind of bread to impress her new in-laws, and all the association with which bread making is universal, fertility. And so I have that conversation. And I remember having that conversation with the young bride. She found it very amusing. I mean, because she didn't relate to what I was saying. But I found that conversation very interesting. Tabahik in the coastal area, they preserve Eid, when we slaughter animals after Ramzan, they preserve that meat. And so that is very, very clearly associated with Eids. And so where the specific recipe is closely connected to a particular event, association, festival, very much so. It is mentioned.
Can I just ask one more question?
Of course.
So it's not because there's not a cross-fertilization of knowledge between men and women in the culture or in the house, do men and women cook together in the house? Ever?
No, that may be a personal, very rare. Right. But I ask our Balochistani here, how much help do you do in the kitchen with your mother, wife, or sister?
Hardly any.
There you go. I rest my case.
They taste.
They taste and they pass it. Like, is it good enough or is it not good enough?
But is it like they have a habit, like in the Baloch culture?
Ma'am, please, बारी पे वो पहले उस सवाल पूछ ले. हाँ, उसके बाद आपकी बात.
Ma'am, is there any chapter about the plight of women?
The whole book is. आप पढ़ें फिर देखें फिर मुझे बताएं. आप पहले किताब पढ़ें फिर मुझे बताएं.
Ma'am, I want to ask about the areas that are connected with Punjab, like Barkan or Sobatpur or Dera Ghazi Khan.
I didn't cover those.
You didn't cover those. Oh, so leave it.
Okay, let me tell from the onset, as I said, my desire was to food map every district, right? But there was also time, financial, like I couldn't do it all. But what I did was, I was very conscious of representation, so the coast was covered, the north was covered, the center was covered, the south was covered, the Baloch were covered, the Bravi were covered, the Pashtuns were covered, the settlers were covered, Zikris were covered, the Hindus were covered, the Sikhs were covered. I was very conscious that I would not make the same mistake that most Pakistanis do, which is Balochistan. Okay, what's Balochistan? So I delve into the complexity and the multiplicity of Balochistan, but I couldn't do every single corner. I mean, I couldn't, I should have done Sibbi, the rice basket or Nasirabad division, but it's a canal colony, I should have, but I didn't.
As you know, ma'am, let me tell you a simple story about Landi. When I used to study in college in Murray, so my friend asked me to brought something special. So I bought a Landi for them. So I kept the Landi on a table. So I went to the classes. So after the classes, when I came and see, there was no landi on a table. So I asked the chacha, this is very costly. So where is the landi? So he thought that it is some dry meat, and he threw
it away.
out of window.
That's an interesting story.
Yeah. I think my mother would share the same sentiment as that person. And my mother's from KP. You know, she's a Pashtun, but from, you know, a different province. And she just cannot. She says, it stinks. What is this? And my father just craves it. You know, so, you know, food has memories. Food has such deep-rooted cultural associations, you know. And I laugh because it's so clear in my own home, you know. Both Pashtuns, but one from Balochistan and one from KP. And she's like, I don't know what this is, you know. And for my dad, it's, you know, like the beginning and end of everything.
So,
Schneid, the same thing with Schneid.
So, ma'am, I got call from my home, and my mom called me. Did you cook well, Landi, for your friend? I said yes. It was a dessert. I said yes. Kate enjoy well. So there is basically about the diversity. You know, food diversity.
Yes.
As we talk about natural diversity or biodiversity, so there must be a food diversity. Many people do not know there in that area, Punjab or especially Sindh, they do not know about the Landi.
Yes.
So maybe it will be helpful through your book that they
Yes,
should.
I mean, the whole point is for you to expand the, you know, the culinary culture of Pakistan. What is, I opened the book by what is Pakistani food.
Yeah. But I have seen Wajahat also in PTO when we used to be younger.
Thank you.
So you carried a van.
Yeah, I didn't do food travel shows.
Yeah.
I was just general
adventure. You
so
did
okay, I'd like to wrap up the session here today. Thank you, Nilofer. It was an interesting talk about your book. Now my last question is, when is the abridged version of the book coming out? Because it is very expensive, you know. It costs 10,000 rupees ki kitab hai yaar. I mean, it costs 10,000 rupees.
Pakistani style.
Yeah, because I think, you know, okay, I think you should donate this book to different libraries and
I have.
So that people can read it.
Yes, yes. There's one upstairs, and there's one in a couple in Gujranwala, and certainly in Balochistan as well.
No, it's a great endeavor, no doubt about that. I mean, I think you did a great job in terms of for posterity's sake. For, you know, you preserve the traditions and the recipes, and I'm sure it will sort of you know, prompt other people to sort of, you know, research about food and maybe go to Balochistan to taste that food and everything. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming to the Black Hole.
Thank you.